The California desert sun blazed mercilessly as Rachel Torres stepped off the transport bus at Camp Pendleton, her regulation uniform hiding 15 years of martial arts training and a determination that burned hotter than the asphalt beneath. Her boots. The imposing concrete barracks stretched before her like a prison, and she knew the next 12 weeks would either forge her into a Marine or break her completely. She was one of only 3 women in Delta Company, a fact that became painfully obvious the moment her fellow recruits spotted her approaching the formation area. Their stares ranged from curious to hostile, but it was the group of 5 men lounging near the barracks entrance that made her stomach tighten with familiar dread. Well, what do we have here?" The voice belonged to Corporal Jake Morrison, a hulking 220-pound former college linebacker whose neck was thicker than most people's thighs. His Alabama drawl dripped with condescension as he swaggered over, 4 other Marines trailing behind him like hyenas following their pack leader. Rodriguez was built like a concrete wall, his massive arms covered in tattoos that told stories of street fights in East Los Angeles. Thompson, pale and wiry, had the calculating eyes of someone who enjoyed watching others suffer. Hayes carried himself with the cocky swagger of a former high school wrestling champion who'd never learned that his glory days were over. Carter, the quietest of the group, seemed content to let others do the talking while he observed and waited for opportunities to strike. Morrison circled Rachel like a predator sizing up wounded prey, his crew erupting in laughter at his every word. "Look at Barbie over here," he sneered, drawing attention from other recruits who were eager for any distraction from their own nervousness. "You sure you got off at the right stop, sweetheart? The cheerleading camp is about 50 miles that way." Rachel kept her expression neutral, a skill she'd learned from years of martial arts training, where emotional control was just as important as physical technique. She'd been studying karate, jiu-jitsu, and kickboxing since she was 7 years old, when her father, a former Army Ranger, decided his daughter needed to know how to defend herself in a world that would constantly underestimate her. But revealing that information now would only paint a bigger target on her back. Instead, she simply nodded politely and continued toward the barracks, shouldering her duffel bag with practiced ease. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Morrison's voice rose as he quickened, his pace to block her path, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow her whole. "Didn't your mama teach you manners? When a superior addresses you, you respond." Rachel met his gaze without flinching, her voice calm and steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. "You're not my superior. We're all recruits here." The comment hit Morrison like a slap across the face. His jaw tightened, and Rachel could see the wheels turning in his head as he filed away this moment of defiance for future reference. She'd just made an enemy, but she'd also established that she wouldn't be an easy victim. The psychological warfare began within hours of settling into the barracks. During their first combat drill, Morrison and his crew positioned themselves strategically around Rachel, accidentally body-checking her during formation runs. When she stumbled, but didn't fall, Rodriguez would mutter loud enough for others to hear, "Careful there, princess. Wouldn't want you to break a nail." The comments drew snickers from some recruits, while others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Rachel noticed a few sympathetic glances from Private Williams, a quiet recruit from Oregon who seemed as out of place as she felt, but no one dared speak up against Morrison's crew. The harassment escalated during meal times. Thompson would accidentally bump into Rachel as she carried her tray, sending food flying across the mess hall floor. When she bent to clean it up, Hayes would make crude comments about her position that left her face burning with humiliation and rage. Carter, meanwhile, would steal items from her footlocker, small things at first, like soap or socks, forcing her to constantly replace basic necessities. But it was during hand-to-hand combat training that Morrison's true strategy revealed itself. He convinced drill instructor Sergeant Davis that Rachel needed extra attention because she was falling behind the male recruits. This wasn't entirely false. Rachel was deliberately holding back her true abilities, not wanting to reveal her extensive martial arts background until she better understood the dynamics at play. Martinez needs work on her basic defensive positions, Morrison would tell Sergeant Davis with fake concern. Maybe some of us more experienced guys could help her out after hours. Davis, a grizzled veteran who seemed to view the integration of women into combat roles as a necessary evil rather than progress, readily agreed to these mentoring sessions. What followed were brutal after-hours training sessions where Morrison and his crew would take turns overpowering Rachel under the guise of instruction. They'd pin her to the mat repeatedly, making comments about how real combat would be different, how enemies wouldn't go easy on her because she was a woman. Each session ended with Morrison's favorite refrain, "Maybe you should consider transferring to a desk job, Martinez. This isn't the place for someone like you." Rachel endured it all with gritted teeth, memorizing every move they made, every weakness they revealed when they thought they were in complete control. Rodriguez favored his right side because of an old shoulder injury. Thompson telegraphed his punches with a slight shoulder dip. Hayes relied too heavily on his wrestling background and became predictable in close quarters. Carter was fast but had poor balance when pressured. And Morrison was all brute force with no finesse. The kind of fighter who'd never faced someone who could match his aggression with superior technique. As the weeks passed, Rachel realized Morrison wasn't just trying to break her spirit. He was building towards something bigger. The way he orchestrated the harassment, the careful escalation of humiliation, the gathering of witnesses during their training sessions. He was setting the stage for a grand finale that would either force her to quit or break her so completely that she'd never recover. What Morrison didn't know was that Rachel had been preparing for this moment her entire life. And when it finally came, she would be ready. Week 4 brought the stress test that would change everything. The training facility buzzed with nervous energy as drill instructor Sergeant Davis announced the day's exercise. Full contact combat scenarios designed to simulate the chaos of real warfare. Rachel had been dreading this moment, knowing that Morrison and his crew had been building towards something explosive for weeks. The predatory gleam in Morrison's eyes during formation told her everything she needed to know. Today was the day he planned to break her. "Today we separate the warriors from the wannabes," Davis barked, his weathered face scanning the assembled recruits like a hawk surveying potential prey. "You'll be tested under pressure, pushed beyond your limits. And some of you will discover you don't have what it takes to wear the uniform." Morrison caught Rachel's eye from across the training mat and smiled. Not the friendly grin of a fellow Marine, but the predatory smirk of someone who'd been planning this moment for weeks. He'd been working on Davis for days, planting seeds about Rachel's deficiencies and suggesting that she needed a reality check before she got herself or others killed in actual combat. Private Williams shot Rachel a worried glance from his position in the formation. Over the past weeks, he'd witnessed enough of the harassment to understand what was really happening, though he'd been too intimidated by Morrison's crew to speak up. The guilt in his eyes told Rachel that he knew something terrible was about to unfold. "Sergeant Davis," Morrison called out with practiced concern, his voice carrying the perfect note of professional worry. "I've been watching Martinez during our training sessions, and I'm worried she's not ready for this level of intensity. Maybe some of us more experienced recruits could give her a demonstration first. Show her what real combat looks like." Davis considered this for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he studied Rachel. She could see the calculation in his expression, the political pressure to ensure female recruits succeeded warring with his genuine belief that coddling anyone would get Marines killed in the field. You think she needs remedial instruction. Morrison? Just want to make sure she's prepared, Sergeant. Combat isn't a place for hesitation or weakness. Morrison's voice carried just the right note of professional concern, but Rachel could see the anticipation gleaming in his eyes like a predator about to pounce on wounded prey. The trap was springing exactly as Morrison had planned. Rachel felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized the full scope of what was about to happen. This wasn't training. This was a public execution designed to humiliate her into quitting, with Sergeant Davis's official blessing providing cover for what was essentially sanctioned assault. Fine, Davis stepped back, crossing his arms as the other recruits formed a loose circle around the designated combat area. Morrison, Rodriguez, Thompson, Hayes, Carter. You five will demonstrate proper combat techniques on Martinez. Show her what she faced in the real world. The circle of recruits pressed closer, some looking uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up, others eager for the spectacle about to unfold. Rachel could hear whispered bets being placed on how long she'd last before breaking down completely. Morrison stepped into the center of the mat, cracking his knuckles theatrically. Don't worry, Princess. We'll go easy on you at first. Help you understand what you're really up against. His crew spread out around her in a loose formation, cutting off any escape routes. Rodriguez flexed his massive shoulders, the tattoos on his arms seeming to writhe in the fluorescent lighting. Thompson bounced on the balls of his feet, like a boxer warming up for a title fight. Hayes dropped into a wrestler's crouch, his eyes locked on Rachel's legs. Carter hung back slightly, content to let the others make the first moves while he waited for his opportunity. The thing about real combat, Morrison continued, his voice carrying across the silent training facility, is that your enemies won't care that you're a woman. They won't pull their punches or worry about hurting your feelings. So we're going to show you what that feels like. Rachel's mind raced through 15 years of martial arts training. Every technique her father had drilled into her. Every sparring session where she'd faced opponents twice her size. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. When you finally strike, make it count. Make it so decisive that no one will ever question your strength again. The first shove came without warning. Morrison's massive hand connecting with Rachel's shoulder and sending her stumbling backward into Rodriguez's waiting arms. The impact drove the air from her lungs as Rodriguez's thick forearms wrapped around her torso, pinning her arms to her sides. See how easy that was, Morrison taunted, circling them like a shark. In real combat, you'd already be dead. But we're feeling generous today, so we'll give you another chance. Rodriguez released her with a contemptuous shove that sent her sprawling across the mat. Rachel rolled with the impact, coming up in a defensive crouch as her training automatically kicked in. But she forced herself to look shaken, to play the part of the overwhelmed recruit they expected her to be. Get up, Thompson sneered, moving. And from her left side, we're just getting started. The harassment continued with methodical precision. Each demonstration grew more brutal, more humiliating, as Morrison's crew took turns overwhelming her with their size and strength. Rachel endured it all, memorizing their patterns, their weaknesses, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal who she really was. And that moment was coming soon. The second assault was more coordinated and vicious than the first. Hayes shot in low, wrapping his arms around Rachel's legs in a textbook wrestling takedown while Thompson grabbed her from behind. Rachel found herself sandwiched between them, their combined weight driving her toward the mat as Morrison's laughter echoed through the facility. This is what happens when you're not strong enough, Morrison called out to the watching recruits, his voice dripping with false authority. When you're too weak to handle the pressure. Martinez here thought she could just waltz in and play soldier, but reality has a way of setting people straight. They let her struggle for a moment, enjoying the spectacle of her apparent helplessness before releasing her again. Rachel's lip was bleeding now from where Thompson's elbow had caught her during the takedown, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth and triggering something primal deep in her chest. Private Williams stood in the circle of onlookers, his face pale with disgust and helpless rage. Several other recruits looked equally uncomfortable, but none dared challenge the systematic brutalization taking place before their eyes. The unwritten rule was clear. Crossing Morrison meant becoming his next target. Had enough yet? Morrison asked, his voice dripping with false concern. No shame in admitting you're not cut out for this. Plenty of other jobs in the military that would suit someone with your ... limitations. Rachel wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand, her mind crystal clear despite the chaos around her. Every technique her father had taught her crystallized into perfect focus. Every hour of training, every sparring session, every moment of discipline and control she'd learned, it all led to this moment, but she wasn't ready to reveal her hand. Not yet. Morrison's grand finale was still coming, and she needed to let him commit fully to his plan before she destroyed it. One more demonstration, Morrison announced to the crowd, his confidence reaching its peak. The way he said it sent chills down Rachel's spine. She could hear the finality in his voice, the promise of something that would cross every line of decency and discipline. Carter, Thompson, hold her steady. Rodriguez, Hayes, let's show everyone what happens when you're not strong enough to defend yourself. This was it. The moment Morrison had been building toward for weeks. Not just humiliation now, but something darker, something that would break her spirit completely and drive her from the cores in shame and trauma. As Thompson moved in from behind and Carter approached from the right, Rachel made a decision that would change everything. She stopped playing the victim, stopped hiding her abilities, and let 15 years of carefully honed skill rise to the surface like a tsunami, building strength in deep water. Her father's voice whispered in her memory, "A warrior chooses their moment. And when that moment comes, they hold nothing back." The transformation was so sudden, so complete, that for a split second, even Morrison didn't realize what was happening. Rachel's posture shifted from defensive to predatory. Her breathing steadied. Her eyes took on the focused intensity of a true martial artist preparing to strike. "Time to learn your place, princess," Morrison said, winding up for what he intended to be the final devastating blow that would break her spirit completely. But as his fist began its arc toward her face, Rachel smiled, a cold, calculating expression that made Morrison's blood run cold. In that instant, he realized he'd made a terrible mistake. This wasn't the helpless recruit he'd been tormenting for weeks. This was something else entirely, and she was about to show him exactly what that meant. The facility held its breath. 50 recruits stood frozen, sensing that something momentous was about to happen. Even Sergeant Davis straightened, his veteran instincts detecting a shift in the air like the calm before a storm. Rachel Torres was done hiding, and Morrison was about to learn why her father had trained her to be twice as good as everyone else, just to be considered equal. Rachel's transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The change rippled through her body like electricity. 15 years of disciplined training suddenly unleashed in a burst of controlled violence that left the entire facility stunned into silence. Thompson was the first to fall, and he never saw it coming. As he reached from behind to grab her arms, Rachel twisted with fluid precision, her body moving like water around his clumsy attempt at restraint. Her elbow shot backward with the force of a piston, connecting with his solar plexus in the exact spot her father had taught her would drop any opponent regardless of size. The impact drove every molecule of air from Thompson's lungs with an audible whoosh, and he collapsed to the mat like a marionette with severed strings, his face turning an alarming shade of purple as he gasped desperately for breath. Morrison's haymaker was already in motion. 220 pounds of muscle and momentum behind a punch that could have shattered concrete. But Rachel had been watching him for weeks, studying his tells, memorizing the way his shoulder dipped slightly before every big swing. She ducked under the blow with millimeters to spare, feeling the wind from his fist ruffle her hair as it passed harmlessly overhead. What happened next defied everything Morrison thought he knew about physics and combat. Rachel's leg swept out in a perfect arc, catching both of Morrison's ankles simultaneously and lifting his feet completely off the ground. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, all 220 pounds of him hung suspended in the air, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Then, gravity reasserted itself with devastating finality. Morrison hit the mat with a thunderous crash that shook the entire facility. The impact was so violent that several recruits in the front row instinctively stepped backward, and Sergeant Davis's coffee mug slipped from his nerveless fingers to shatter on the concrete floor. Morrison's head bounced once against the padded surface, his eyes rolling back as consciousness fled his battered body. Rodriguez charged from the left like an enraged bull, his massive frame moving with surprising speed for someone his size. But speed without technique was just momentum waiting to be redirected, and Rachel had been redirecting momentum since she was 7 years old. She planted her left foot and pivoted, her right leg whipping around in a spinning heel kick that her sensei had made her practice 10,000 times until it became as natural as breathing. The kick caught Rodriguez in the ribs with surgical precision, right where Rachel had noticed him favoring his left side during their training sessions. The sound of the impact was like a baseball bat connecting with a side of beef, a wet, meaty thud that made several recruits wince in sympathetic pain. Rodriguez's forward momentum carried him 3 more steps before his brain registered what had happened. Then he crumpled sideways, clutching his ribs and making small wounded animal sounds. Hayes, the former wrestling champion, tried to use his low center of gravity to his advantage, shooting in for a double-leg takedown, and it served him well in high school. But high school wrestling and real combat were different universes, and Rachel had trained in both. As Hayes committed to his takedown, Rachel sprawled backward, using his own momentum against him while simultaneously grabbing the back of his head. What followed was a textbook judo throw that would have made her father proud. Rachel used Hayes's forward momentum to lift him completely off the ground, his body describing a perfect arc through the air before slamming into the mat with bone-jarring force. The throw was so clean, so technically perfect, that even in his dazed state, Hayes couldn't help but appreciate the artistry of his own destruction. Carter, the smartest of Morrison's crew, had been hanging back and watching the systematic demolition of his teammates with growing horror. He'd always prided himself on being the tactical thinker of the group, the one who planned while others acted. But no amount of planning could have prepared him for what he was witnessing. In less than 30 seconds, Rachel had dismantled 4 Marines with the casual efficiency of someone swatting flies. Carter took one look at the carnage surrounding him and made the smartest decision of his military career. His hand shot up in the universal gesture of surrender, his voice cracking as he spoke. "I'm good. I'm really, really good. No demonstration needed here." The entire sequence had lasted 28 seconds. 28 seconds to completely rewrite the power structure of Delta Company and establish a new order that no one would ever dare challenge again. Rachel stood in the center of the mat, not even breathing hard, her uniform barely wrinkled despite the violence that had just erupted around her. The training facility had fallen into a silence so complete that the only sounds were Thompson's labored breathing, Rodriguez's quiet whimpering, and the distant hum of the air conditioning system. 50 recruits stood frozen in place, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Sergeant Davis stood with his mouth hanging open, his weathered face cycling through expressions of shock, disbelief, and something that might have been respect. Anyone else need a demonstration? Rachel asked quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent facility. No one answered. No one moved. No one even seemed to be breathing. The security footage went viral within the Marine Corps before Rachel even left the medical bay where she was treated for her split lip. Corporal Jenkins, who operated the facility's surveillance system, had watched the 28-second demolition 3 times in stunned silence before realizing he was sitting on the most incredible piece of combat footage in Marine Corps history. Within an hour, the video had been copied to a dozen different drives and was making its way through military networks faster than wildfire through dry brush. "Holy hell," whispered Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb as he watched the footage for the 5th time in his office at Camp Pendleton's headquarters. "Get General Patterson on the phone. She needs to see this immediately." General Patricia Patterson, the base commander and the highest-ranking female officer at Camp Pendleton, was in the middle of a budget meeting when her aide burst through the door with a laptop clutched against his chest. "Ma'am, you need to see this right now. It's about one of our recruits." The general's expression shifted from annoyance to fascination to outright amazement as she watched Rachel systematically dismantle 5 Marines with the precision of a surgeon and the efficiency of a machine. She rewound the footage, studying each technique, each perfectly executed movement that spoke of years of dedicated training and natural talent. "Where did this recruit learn to fight like that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Meanwhile, in the medical bay, Rachel sat on an examination table while Navy Corpsman Rodriguez, no relation to the Rodriguez, currently nursing broken ribs in the bed across the hall, cleaned a cut on her lip. Through the thin walls of the medical bay, Rachel could hear Morrison groaning as he slowly regained consciousness, his voice slurred and confused. "What happened? Did a truck hit me?" "No truck," came Hayes' voice, thick with pain and grudging respect. "Just a 5'4" reality check." The real transformation began in the hours following the incident. Word spread through the barracks like a virus, growing and mutating with each telling until Rachel's 28 seconds of fury had taken on mythical proportions. She moved like something out of a movie. Private Jackson told a group of wide-eyed recruits. 1 second Morrison was about to crush her. The next second he was eating mad and seeing stars. "I heard she's some kind of black belt," whispered Private Williams, finally finding his voice now that Morrison's reign of terror was over. "Multiple disciplines. Her father was Special Forces or something." The speculation continued to build, until Sergeant Davis finally called for order during evening formation. His weathered face was unreadable as he addressed the assembled recruits, but there was something different in his voice, a note of respect that hadn't been there before. "What happened today in the training facility will not be discussed outside this unit," he announced. "What I will say is this. Every one of you just learned a valuable lesson about making assumptions. Size, gender, appearance, none of that matters when skill and training meet determination." His eyes found Rachel in the formation, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Camp Pendleton, she saw something other than skepticism in his gaze. "Martinez demonstrated something today that I want all of you to remember. A true warrior isn't defined by how they look, but by what they can do when pushed to their limits." The real change came the next morning when Morrison, sporting a spectacular black eye and moving like an old man, approached Rachel during chow. The mess hall fell silent as every recruit watched to see what would happen next. Morrison's crew, those who were mobile enough to attend breakfast, flanked him nervously, clearly unsure whether this was reconciliation or round 2. Rodriguez had his torso wrapped in bandages. Thompson still wheezed when he breathed. And Hayes walked with the careful gait of someone whose entire body felt like it had been hit by a train. Morrison stopped 3 feet away from Rachel's table, his hands hanging loose at his sides in a gesture of non-aggression. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent mess hall with crystal clarity. "Martinez," he said, his southern drawl subdued and respectful. "I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. What we did to you these past weeks, that wasn't training. That was bullying, plain and simple. And yesterday, you showed us what real strength looks like." Rachel looked up from her breakfast, studying Morrison's face for any sign of deception or continued hostility. What she saw instead was genuine remorse and something she'd never expected to see from him: respect. "I learned more about combat effectiveness in those 30 seconds than I did in 4 years of college football and 6 weeks of Marine training," Morrison continued. "You could have seriously hurt us. Well, you could have killed us if you'd wanted to. But you showed restraint even while defending yourself. That's the mark of a true warrior." Rodriguez stepped forward with obvious difficulty, his voice strained, but sincere. "We were wrong about you, Martinez. Dead wrong. And if anyone in this company has a problem with you from now on, they'll have to go through us first." The transformation was remarkable. Morrison's crew, who had spent weeks terrorizing Rachel, became her most vocal defenders. They spread the word throughout the base that she was off limits, that anyone who messed with her would answer to them. But more importantly, they began to change themselves. The bullying behavior that had defined their time at Camp Pendleton disappeared entirely, replaced by a newfound respect for their fellow recruits and a genuine desire to become better Marines. Private Williams, emboldened by Rachel's example, began standing up to bullies in other companies. Several female recruits sought Rachel out for advice and mentorship. The entire atmosphere of Delta Company shifted from one of intimidation and fear to one of mutual respect and genuine camaraderie. Word of the incident reached the highest levels of command, but rather than face disciplinary action, Rachel found herself summoned to General Patterson's office. The meeting would change the trajectory of her entire military career. "Sit down, Martinez," General Patterson said, without looking up from the security footage playing on her computer screen. I've been watching this footage for the better part of 2 hours, and I have one question for you." Rachel sat at attention, her mind racing through possible disciplinary actions and consequences. "Yes, ma'am." General Patterson finally looked up, her steel gray eyes meeting Rachel's with laser focus. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "My father, ma'am. He's former Army Rangers. Started training me when I was 7 years old. Said the world would constantly underestimate me because of my size and gender, so I needed to be twice as good as everyone else just to be considered equal." "And what did he teach you about using those skills?" Rachel straightened even further, her father's words coming back to her with perfect clarity. "He taught me that respect isn't given based on size or gender, ma'am. It's earned through skill, discipline, and knowing when to use your abilities. He also taught me that true strength means protecting those who can't protect themselves, not picking on those you think are weaker." General Patterson leaned back in a chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Your father sounds like a wise man. And based on what I saw in that footage, he raised hell of a Marine." General Patterson stood and moved to the window overlooking the training facility where new recruits were going through their paces. Her next words would reshape Rachel's entire future in the Marine Corps. "Martinez, I'm going to make you an offer. After you complete basic training, and I have no doubt you'll graduate at the top of your class, I want you to consider becoming a hand-to-hand combat instructor. We need people who can teach not just technique, but the philosophy behind it. The understanding that true strength comes from discipline, not dominance." Rachel felt her heart racing as the implications of the offer sank in. "Ma'am, I would be honored." Good, because starting tomorrow, you're going to help me rewrite our combat training protocols. What happened in that facility yesterday is going to become a teaching tool, not just about fighting techniques, but about respect, assumptions, and what it really means to be a Marine. The general turned back to face Rachel, her expression serious but warm. We've had problems with bullying and harassment in our training programs for too long. Traditional methods of addressing it haven't been effective. But what you did, defending yourself with skill and restraint while maintaining your dignity, that's something we can build on. Over the following weeks, Rachel worked closely with General Patterson and the training staff to develop new protocols. The security footage of her 28-second demonstration became a cornerstone of the new curriculum, used to illustrate everything from proper defensive techniques to the importance of never underestimating fellow Marines. Morrison, Rodriguez, Thompson, Hayes, and Carter became willing participants in the new program, sharing their perspectives on how toxic behavior develops and how it can be countered. Their transformation from bullies to advocates became almost as legendary as Rachel's fighting display. We thought we were teaching her a lesson, Morrison would tell new classes of recruits. Turns out she was the one doing the teaching. Real strength isn't about intimidating others. It's about having the skill and character to stand up for what's right. The program's success exceeded everyone's expectations. Reports of harassment and bullying dropped dramatically across all training facilities. Female recruitment increased as word spread that the Marine Corps was serious about creating an environment where everyone could succeed based on merit rather than politics or intimidation. Rachel's reputation spread throughout the military. She received commendations from senior officers, requests for guest lectures at other bases, and inquiries from military academies wanting to incorporate her story into their leadership curricula. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source: her father. Master Sergeant David Torres had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and earned more medals than he cared to count. But when he watched the security footage of his daughter's moment of truth, tears streamed down his weathered face. "That's my girl," he whispered to himself, pride swelling in his chest. "That's exactly what I trained her for." When he called Rachel that evening, his voice was thick with emotion. "You did more than defend yourself out there, sweetheart. You stood up for every person who's ever been told they don't belong. Every warrior who's been judged by their appearance instead of their heart. I couldn't be prouder." 6 months later, Instructor Martinez stood before a new class of recruits. The security footage of her legendary 28 seconds playing on the screen behind her. Morrison, now a close friend and training partner, stood beside her as her assistant instructor, his transformation from bully to mentor complete. "The first lesson you need to learn," Rachel told the wide-eyed recruits, "is that strength comes in many forms. Some of you are big, some are small, some are fast, some are strong, but all of you have the potential to be warriors if you're willing to put in the work and show respect for your fellow Marines." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the diverse group of faces before her. Men and women of all sizes, backgrounds, and ethnicities, united by their commitment to serve their country. The Marine Corps doesn't care what you look like when you walk through those doors. What matters is who you become when you walk back out. And if you remember nothing else from my class, remember this: never judge a warrior by their size. Judge them by their heart, their skill, and their willingness to stand up for what's right. A young female recruit in the front row raised her hand tentatively. "Ma'am, what if someone tries to bully us? What if they're bigger and stronger?" Rachel smiled, remembering her own fears and uncertainties when she first arrived at Camp Pendleton. Then you remember that size and strength mean nothing without skill and determination. You train hard, you stay disciplined, and you never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. And if someone crosses the line, you stand up for yourself, not with anger or hatred, but with the confidence that comes from knowing who you are and what you're capable of. Morrison stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned his lessons the hard way. And remember this too, real Marines look out for each other. We don't tear each other down. We build each other up. The person next to you isn't your enemy. They're your brother or sister in arms. The class nodded solemnly, understanding that they were receiving more than just combat instruction. They were learning what it meant to be part of something bigger than themselves, something built on mutual respect and shared sacrifice. As the weeks passed, Rachel's influence continued to grow. Her training methods were adopted at bases across the country. Military leadership programs incorporated her story into their curricula. Young women considering military service cited her example as inspiration to pursue their dreams despite the obstacles they might face. The legend of Rachel Martinez continued to grow, inspiring a new generation of Marines who understood that true strength wasn't about intimidation or dominance. It was about excellence, respect, and the courage to stand up to bullies, no matter how big they might be. Years later, when Rachel had achieved the rank of Master Sergeant and was running her own training facility, she would still receive letters from Marines around the world, thanking her for showing them that anyone could be a warrior if they had the heart for it. And in the back of every training facility, new recruits would whisper the story of the woman who knocked out 5 Marines in 28 seconds, not because she was angry, but because she was finally ready to stop hiding who she really was. The security footage still played in training centers across the globe, a 28-second masterpiece of precision, restraint, and warrior spirit that reminded everyone who watched it that strength comes not from size or gender, but from the courage to stand up for what's right and the skill to back up that courage when the moment demands it. Rachel Torres had set out to become a Marine. Instead, she became a legend, and in doing so, she changed what it meant to be a warrior for generations to come. Her father's words echoed through the decades, whispered by drill instructors to recruits who needed to understand the true meaning of strength. A warrior chooses their moment, and when that moment comes, they hold nothing back. Rachel had chosen her moment, and in those 28 seconds, she had held nothing back. The legend lived on, inspiring warriors who would never meet her but would carry her example in their hearts, knowing that no matter what challenges they faced, they too could choose their moment and reveal the warrior within. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.